guys, I hope you're doing well. My name is Quinn and welcome to my channel and another episode of Cheap versus Expensive, where I compare two of the same products at different price ranges and let you know my thoughts and opinions regarding each one. So in this video, I'm really excited to be comparing the Urban Decay Naked Heat Palette to what is supposed to be an identical dupe, which is the Copycat Beauty FOGO palette. Now, if you guys don't know about Copycat Beauty, it is the brand that Danielle Bregoli, aka Bhad Bhabie, just signed a $900 endorsement deal with. Now, their whole concept is to pretty much take popular products from high-end cosmetic brands and completely copy the entire product but sell it at a much cheaper price. Now, I actually have separate reviews for each one of these palettes, so if you're interested in either one of these and you want a more in-depth review, be sure to check those out. In this video, I just want to really compare both of these side by side to see if the Copycat Beauty FOGO palette really is a dupe for the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette. The Urban Decay Naked Heat palette comes in this gorgeous like plastic, really sturdy packaging, and it just feels really, really good in your hand. It's very sturdy. It feels like very nice packaging. The Copycat Beauty comes in this kind of like cardboard packaging. The Copycat Beauty has their palette in 2 rows, and this is just a single row, which I really like because you can kind of see all of the colors and how they line up from lightest to darkest. The Naked Heat palette is a lot heavier than the Copycat Beauty palette, which makes a lot of sense considering this is plastic and this is paper. But at the end of the day, this is more expensive than this. Which brings us to the next topic of comparison, which is the price. Now, if you're interested in the Naked Heat palette, you're going to be paying $54 for this whole palette. And if you want the Copycat Beauty palette, you're looking to pay $8.99 for it. So it is a dramatic difference between these two palettes. Now, Copycat Beauty is actually known for duplicating other palettes. So each one of the shades in here is supposed to be duplicated by the shades over here. So this shade right here is supposed to be similar to the Naked Heat Ounce, and then this shade is supposed to be this one, and so forth. And so the next portion of this comparison is the swatch test. I'm actually really curious to see how these colors will compare against each other. Okay, so here is what the first 6 shades of both of these palettes look like side by side. The one on the left is the cheap, and the one on the right is the expensive. The first shade is supposed to be Ounce. The Copycat Beauty Ounce came off a lot wider than the actual Ounce from the Naked Heat palette. The second shade is Chaser, and this shade was actually very impressive. I think Copycat Beauty did a great job duping the Naked Heat palette for this color. And then the shade after that is Sauced. And this shade also is another one that was very similar. The Copycat Beauty swatch though seems a little bit more on the cool tone than the Naked Heat palette. This to me looks a little bit warmer. The shade after that is a Low Blow, and I think this is where you can actually start seeing the difference between the two. The Copycat Beauty swatch seems to be a lot on the cooler side than the Naked Heat palette. The Naked Heat palette looks really rich, really warm, and I feel like overall the Naked Heat palette is a lot more pigmented in these two swatches. Alright, so the next shade is Lumbre, or Lumbre, I'm not sure how to say that. And these two actually look very similar. The Copycat Beauty one actually looks a little bit more pink to me. The next shade is He Devil, and this one you can definitely see the Naked Heat palette swatch is so much more pigmented than the Copycat Beauty swatch. The Copycat Beauty swatch also is still on the cooler side, and this one is just a lot more rich and warm. So here are the last 6 shades from both palettes. The first shade in these swatches is Dirty Talk, and to be honest, they both look very, very similar to me. Again, I think the Naked Heat palette has a little bit of a warmer tone to it. This one looks a little bit more orange. And then the next shade is Scorched, and this shade I love. This shade, it looks like the Naked Heat palette swatch is a lot more pigmented. It shows up a lot better than the Copycat Beauty swatch. This one just looks a little bit dull to me, not even as shimmery. The shade after that is Cayenne. This is actually one of my favorite shades in this palette. And again, the Naked Heat palette just looks so much more pigmented than the Copycat Beauty swatch. Then the shade after that is En Fuego. Again, as you guys can see, the Naked Heat palette swatch is so much more pigmented than the Copycat Beauty swatch. The shade after that is Ashes. And this one is actually pretty comparable, but as you guys can see, the swatch from the Naked Heat palette just goes so much further than the swatch from the Copycat Beauty palette. A little bit more pigmented, but I think this is one of those shades that is a little bit more comparable, and Copycat Beauty did a good job duping this shade. And then lastly, we have the shade Ember, and oh my goodness, do I love this shade. And just by looking at this, you can see it's like night and day. The Naked Heat palette is so much richer and more pigmented than the Copycat Beauty swatch. And with a shade that's this dark, I feel like pigmentation is very, very important. So here's a look at all 12 shades in these palettes. So after swatching both these palettes and comparing each shade side by side with one another, I feel comfortable saying that the Copycat Beauty palette is going to be more on the cool tone than the Naked Heat palette. Naked Heat palette has really warm tones, lots of reds in it. Also, the Naked Heat palette is so much more pigmented than the Copycat Beauty palette. Even when I tried to go back over some of these swatches to see if I could build up the pigmentation for the Copycat Beauty swatch to match the Naked palette swatch, it just wasn't getting there. So next, I'm going to try to create an identical eyeshadow look using both of these palettes just to see how well they apply and how well they blend out, and if one is better than the other. So I'm going to be applying the Copycat Beauty to this side of my face and the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette to this side of my face. So for this look, I'm going to switch it up and create like a darker kind of look and see how that looks. So first, I'm going to come in with the shade Ounce and apply that all over my eyelids. So I'm going to come in with the shade Low Blow and apply that onto my crease. So already I'm noticing that the Low Blow shadow from the Urban Decay Naked palette just goes so much further. I literally had to dip into the Copycat Beauty palette 4 or 5 times to get it to build to look like this, and this is literally from one dip into the Naked Heat palette, and it's so much more pigmented than this. Alright, so next I'm going to go in with the shade He Devil and just apply that onto my crease. And that was literally one dip into the palette using the Urban Decay Naked Heat side. With the Copycat Beauty, the first pass or the first dip into the palette, I honestly couldn't even tell a difference between the He Devil shade and the Low Blow that I had before that, and it took a second dip into the palette to actually get that kind of reddish brick color to show up. But it eventually did show up, so 2 dips compared to 1, both really pretty. Okay, now I'm going to go in with the shade En Fuego and use it to pretty much just go along my crease. So next I'm going to go in with the shade Ashes and concentrate that on the outer corner of my eyes. Alright, so both of these I did come in with Ashes and did 2 dips into both palettes, and I can definitely see that the Naked Heat palette, the color is a lot deeper. It just seems more pigmented. There's a lot more coverage, and on the Copycat Beauty side, there's a little bit, it's a lot more sheer. The Ashes color, which is supposed to be the darkest color in this palette, isn't really coming through as well. With Ashes, I'm also going to kind of apply some on my bottom lid. With a small precision brush, I'm going to wet that and then pick up some of the shade Scorched and just apply that on the very center of my bottom lash. With another wet brush, you're going to come in with the shade Ember and pick up some of that color. The Naked Heat palette Ember is so much more reflective than the Copycat Beauty. What a difference, guys. This last color, like, you can definitely tell a difference between the 2 shades. Okay, while I wait for that to dry, I'm just going to add a little bit more of that Ounce color on the inner corner of my eyes. Alright, so that is pretty much it for my eyeshadows. I'm going to finish off the rest of my eye makeup and then check in with you guys and let you guys know my thoughts and opinions regarding both of these palettes. Alright, so here is what everything looks like with all my makeup done, and I do love this look. This is a lot more dramatic than I normally go for, but I don't hate it. I actually really like it, and I totally want to recreate this look in the future to go out. I think this is really pretty. So as I mentioned before, I created this eyes look with the Urban Decay Naked Heat Palette, and then I created this look with the Copycat Beauty Palette. I tried to use comparable shades from each palette, so this look should be identical since the Copycat Beauty Palette is supposed to be like an identical dupe to the Naked Heat Palette. I love the way my makeup looks right now, and so yeah, I do like both of these palettes. So after doing the swatches, after creating this look using both palettes, I would definitely say that the Copycat Beauty has a much cooler tone to all of their shades than the Urban Decay Naked Heat Palette. Even some of the darker colors kind of comes off more brown. With this, you're gonna get more of that red undertone with your makeup, which I really like because, you know, it is supposed to be like that heat look. Another thing is a lot of the swatches from the Urban Decay Naked Heat Palette were a lot more pigmented than the Copycat Beauty Palette, especially when you get to the darker shades. When it comes to the darker tones and like the shimmer shades, it just wasn't really that comparable in my opinion. Very similar, but not an exact match. And I feel like because the shadows are a lot less pigmented than the Urban Decay Naked Heat Palette shadows, you're having to use almost twice as much product when you're trying to create your look. I had to dip into this product 2 or 3 times to create a comparable look to this, and even then, even with going back multiple times, I wasn't able to exactly get the coverage and the pigmentation I was able to get with the Naked palette. So with the Naked Heat palette, I think the most I dipped into the palette was like 2, maybe 3 times, but I was able to get so much product. So it was really nice. I didn't have to, you know, keep working at my eyeshadow to get it to look the way I wanted to. Whereas this one, I definitely did have to build onto it, build onto it, build onto it. It was kind of like, you know, a lot more work to try to get the same look using the Copycat Beauty palette. So I feel like because you have to dip into the Copycat Beauty palette so many more times, that just means that you're going to be using so much more product and going through this a lot faster than you would be going through this. Speaking of, when I was looking at these palettes kind of more closely, it looks like the eyeshadow pans in these are not filled up all the way. It almost looks like they're like filled up halfway, as opposed to the Naked Heat palette. It looks like it's filled up so much higher than the pans in this. So I'm almost wondering if you're getting less product with this than with this. But again, that's just my opinion. That's just what it looks like to me. So I can't really say for sure because I don't really know exactly how much is in each one of these eyeshadow pans. Also, I definitely noticed that pigmentation aside, the shimmer shades for the Urban Decay Naked palette was so much more light reflective. I noticed that they just pop a lot more than the shimmer shades for the Copycat Beauty palettes. These shades almost like kind of give you like a dull look. It's still shimmery, it's still pretty, don't get me wrong, but just not as reflective as these. They're just not as shiny, and I think that's really clear just from this eye makeup look. It was a huge difference to me. So definitely the shimmer shades, if you're into shimmers, are very different. So overall, I really do like the colors from both of these palettes. As you guys can see with this makeup look, it turned out great on both eyes, and I'm really pleased with both of these palettes. But if I had to choose which one is better and which one I like better, I think by far the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette won this side-by-side comparison with flying colors. Yeah, I'm able to kind of create a very similar look using both of these palettes, but what it comes down to is that higher pigmentation that the Urban Decay has that the Copycat Beauty palette doesn't have, which equals to not only a beautiful, richer looking look in the end, but also saves on product. You're going to be using less products, which means that this palette's going to last a lot longer than this palette. Also, it's going to be saving you time because you don't have to keep coming back in and trying to build up the cover over and over again. You're gonna be saving so much more time with a higher pigmentation shadow such as this as opposed to this. However, if you're not comfortable paying $54 for the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette and you just want the colors that this is able to give you and you don't think that you're going to be using it that often, then this is definitely a great buy. This is able to give you a very, very similar look to this. I would say like 80%, like 90% comparison to the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette for so much cheaper. $8.99 compared to $54. So that is also something to consider. So for me, because I really, really do enjoy all of the shades from this palette, and I feel like this palette is going to be something that I go to very, very often, I would go with the Urban Decay Naked Heat palette just because I want this to last a lot longer. But that is just my opinion, and at the end of the day, it just comes down to personal preference. What are your thoughts and opinions regarding these two palettes? Please let me know in the comment section below. Give this video a like if you guys enjoyed it, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to click on that subscribe button right there and hit that bell notification so you can see more videos like this. I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye!